Hello everybody, hopefully you can hear me. Let me know if there are any sound or video problems, as we often experience one or both of those things. I'm just gonna, nope, that's not where the glare is coming from, whatever. Hi Quindy. So, I'll give people just a few more minutes to come. I'll switch over to the other view and hi Bob and Julie. Talk about what we're gonna do today for a minute. And let's get going. Hi, Julia Trent. All right, so this is the kind of thing I'm going to be painting today, which is a monochromatic color scheme. So that can be, a monochromatic color scheme can be true black and white, like the old movies or photographs, which this figure is not a complete figure, but it's something from when I taught a black and white monochromatic class. Hi, it's Shizzy. Thank you for letting me know you can hear me. Anki 2014. This is more of like a sepia tone example of a monochromatic. And this is kind of a faded blue. I'm trying to remember, I think I just used blue liner and mixed it with white, but it's possible I used the twilight blues. So it's like snow shadow, twilight blue, midnight blue. That's probably what I used, and then white and blue liner on either end of that. I'm going to use a slightly different color scheme today. Let me just, oh, and then just for those who weren't here last week, I talked about the Reaper goodies that they have for October. And when I'm waiting for something to dry, I'll probably review some of those. And then I painted using the pumpkin orange paint. And this is one of the Bonesylvanian, well, part of a set of the Bonesylvanian figures that are available. So this Bonesylvanian is in Bones Plastic. There are a number of them that have been released in Bones Plastic, but this month Reaper has put on sale some of the ones that haven't been available previously. So these were available in 2014 and 2015, I think. So this is the one I'm going to be painting on, and I'll switch over to my pictures for a minute. So that's the one I painted for the Reaper Studio. And then when I went looking, I've been sharing pictures, you know, alternate views of these figures. I'll just go back and show you the back. And then the colors that I used to paint them on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm going to put up a post on my blog tonight. But I realized when I looked at the colors that I'd used on this figure that everything except pure white was either a special edition color or no longer available. So although I thought this would be a great example to paint on stream, because hopefully I can get through a lot of the figure in one stream. That's one of the advantages of a monochromatic color scheme. I didn't want to kind of taunt you with paints you don't have, that you might not have and might not be able to acquire. So I worked on, let me go back to this view. I worked on some alternative colors. Hold on. I had put my light on. I didn't think I had. So, for example, Maggot White is one of the colors that I had used on the original. It's Betty. She kind of ghost bride. Hi, Clavicus. So, Vampire Pallor, which was available, I think, in the Reapercon, one of the Reapercon swag boxes, is a similar color, but maybe you didn't get those. So I tested mixing white with some different colors, and mixing white with Dragon Green, and you'd use a little less, a little more white than I've used here, gets you a color that's pretty similar. Then for the pale blues, I had used a sample color, so even at the time no one could get it, and then winter blue. And what I found is Templar blue is pretty close to this winter blue. Where is Templar? That's Templar blue. And then if you mix it with white, you get a color that's pretty close to the sample color. So although I had picked out Hobgoblin blue as kind of similar to that as well. And then you could just add a little bit of the darker color. So if you had Hobgoblin blue, which is part of the Pathfinder Peso set, or Templar blue with mixes of white, you can kind of get the middle colors. And actually I did forget one picture in the images, because if you come over there, there's the colors that I had mixed to paint the figure. And then for the darkest color, I had used this Night Sky blue. And I tried various things. I tried some more purpley ones. I think Kraken Ink, which is another color, it might even be from last year's Reaper Kraken Ink plus the Templar Blue made something pretty close. Midnight plus Templar, I think, would work all right as well. I ended up deciding to try this Night Sky Indigo and add a little bit of purple in. So I'm kind of going to have purple in the darker colors, and then a little bit of this green in the lighter colors. So before the stream started, to save you having to watch paint dry, I put on some initial coats. And overall, this is going to be a fairly pale color scheme. But one of the things about a monochromatic color scheme, and I'll put some of these guys in the background too, is that you lose color as a context. So you can't say something is blonde hair by painting it, a yellowy brown. And you can't say something's, armor color by painting it. Well, okay, armor actually is often gray. But we use color for a lot of context. And you lose that when you use a monochromatic color scheme. So you have to... We also use color for a lot of contrast. So we're always talking about contrast. And if you want to push your value contrast, this is a great way to do that because you're taking away a lot of your other tools. You can't use complementary colors. You can't use color contrast between a more saturated and a more muted color. You can't use color for context. All you have are the different shades of color. Now, in this particular case, I don't really have just like black to white. That would be a true monochromatic color scheme. I fiddled with the colors a little, but it does still end up. So this is a value scale. You can barely see the white because the paper is pretty close to white, to black. And then I'll show you the paints that I've mixed up, which are essentially a value scale. And I'm going to have to use those. So I'm going to take this away. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to paint over my palette because today I'm using the Weld palette like Anne does. So I'll zoom out a little bit. And you may wonder, what are these sponges here for? And I've talked about my reverse wet palette system in the past, but I thought this would also be a nice time to show you that. So I use the ceramic palette, the same kind that Anne does if you watch her show. This is a 27 little wells. This particular one I bought at Cheap Joe's, and that's the best pricing I've seen for them. That's a US online art store. I have seen them on Amazon, but usually the prices are a little higher. So this is nice because these little wells are a lot smaller than even this is a mini Flower Petals 7 well palette. So this is smaller than the one if you bought something like this that you have. And then these are smaller again. So the paints evaporate much more slowly out of here than they do out of a bigger well palette. So when I'm doing, like I want to do super smooth blending, like on the Afridi or so Ziba is the Afridi, and then the male was just called Fire Scion or Scion of Fire or something, the box that just came out. So that's blending that I'm working on something over days. I'm fussing over every little transition. This is how I do it. I don't use a wet palette. But I am able to keep this paint workable for days with the sponges. So these sponges are actually too dry. I didn't want them dripping all in while I'm on stream. But I would wet them to the point where if I just press a little, water is going to come out. And then I put them over here. I have to check the sponges every day or so, and I usually check the paints too, just come in and stir them. And if they're getting gloopy, I add a little bit of water. So a wet palette is not the only way. In fact, I don't like using paint off a wet palette the next day. It's either had water drip in because it's been sealed, or it's dried up, or whatever. The consistency is not exactly what I want. The paint doesn't feel fresh. I'd rather put out new paint. To me, a wet palette is to keep paint fresh during a session. Now, I'll occasionally, if I just have to do a little touch-up or something, I'll work with the paint I have on the wet palette. But if I'm wanting to paint, I'm painting the cloak of a giant or a big figure like the Fire Scion over several days, where it's going to take me a while to do all the blends on all the parts, this is how I'm doing it. So I call this a reverse wet palette because I'm putting the wet part on top. I think Anne sometimes puts like saran wrap on hers. You could probably do it with paper towels as well. And even when I'm working, if I know I'm working over a series of days, and I'll be working on the highlights, I will keep the sponge over the shadows colors. So these are the colors that I mixed up using the blue liner, Night Sky Indigo, Templar Blue, Pure White, and then a little bit of this Dragon Green. So I had thought maybe I'd want to play with, some shades of light blue and some shades of light green. So this is the equivalent of Vampire Pallor or Maggot White. But when I started putting it on the figure, I didn't love it. So I mixed just a little bit of these white and greens, white mixed with green, into some of my other colors, like for a little bit of a ghostly bit. But so I am going to stay more truly monochromatic. That's just the second color in there. But I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to paint over the palette, because I really am used to having it right there while I'm doing this. So I'll try to zoom in a little more, but I'm hoping it will stay in focus. I feel like I don't have as much light, but who knows. And then I'm old and blind, so I'm going to wear this. And I may or may not be able to finish all the details, but we'll see. Unlike the figure that I painted for Reaper, I'm going to try working up from my darkest colors for most of this. I mean, the hair, I probably did do that on the original figure. It's tricky with white. I often find that I'll add shadows and they'll be too much, and then I have to spend a lot of time going back and taking them out. So I'm going to try out to avoid doing that, because one of the things that can be fun about working, in a monochromatic color scheme is that once you have this all done, you're just painting. You don't have to worry about mixing paint or anything like that. You're just worried about your values and where you're putting them. And if we go back to the original picture for a second. So the skin, you can see that there are some darker shadows than you might think, and then the hair is fairly dark. And I'm doing that because, let's say I wanted her to be a blonde, pale-skinned person. Everything would pretty much be the same value on the figure, and it would be very hard for you, we've talked about that arm's length thing, it would be very hard for you to see what's what, or it wouldn't draw a lot of visual interest. So I'm mixing it up with some darker colors. And then the effect of having very light colors on here is this probably looks like it's one of these colors to you, her skin. It's actually this color. So really it's only like my fourth or fifth darkest color. It's not super dark. I feel like I'm going to increase that brightness just a little. So if anything starts flaring out, let me know. But it seems like my screen was looking a little darker than the actual colors. All right, so I did some of these coats, these base coats, before I started, because as I mentioned, now you don't have to wait for paint to dry. I'm just looking for a few places to touch up. One of the things with white is that sometimes it changes my order of operations. So I know one of the big questions people have, particularly when they're first starting to paint, is like, what order should you paint things? And generally speaking, my advice would be inside out. So I would paint her face, then probably the dress, well, the inside of the dress, then the hair, because the hair is over other things, then the veil, because the veil is over other things, and then this little flower, because that is on top of other things. In the case of white, because it's hard to cover over if you make goofs, sometimes it's easier to kind of paint the white last, where you just do all the touch-ups at once. So I may or may not do that, but I think I am going to start with the face, and then if I have a, stuff is drying kind of thing, I will work on this, I think I got water in that paint, on the underskirt. The thing that's kind of interesting about, well, not interesting, I've decided to make the underskirt a little darker than I did in the original, just for that added contrast and interest. So it's going to end up a lot lighter. That's kind of the shadow color. I'm just putting in a little bit of, where the lace would have some deeper shadows, because there's sections that are overhanging other sections. So I'm just going to do a little bit of that. And then go into adding lighter colors. Maybe I'll even do a little bit on this seam. And this is a section of the figure that would work pretty well with with dry brushing and washing. I think I probably did do washes for this initially on the Reaper Studio one. I mean, just going to add a little bit of a darker shadow. So the one thing I didn't base coat, and I don't know if you would have noticed it in the when I was showing the pictures, I didn't base coat I didn't choose one of these colors for the base. She's a ghost, and when I painted all of the Bonsylvanians, I used the same color for all of their bases. So the ghosts figures, where I normally would try to integrate colors in to the base and stuff, they're supposed to look like they're not part of the same world. So I did not make them, add colors to the base color. So I'm just going to start going up with the lighter colors on the skin while those extra little shadows dry on the underskirt. These are, if you haven't painted this kind of figure, and I think I mentioned this last week, that when Ron first asked me about painting these, I was kind of nervous because I hadn't really painted chibi style figures or even like much comic book style painting, and I wasn't sure if my style of painting would translate over. I wasn't sure how to do the eyes. I was actually kind of nervous about doing them. And then when I sat down and did it, it was super fun. I really had a lot of fun doing it. And I recommend, if you're feeling in a rut, if you're feeling like you want to try something a little bit different, this is exactly the kind of figure to pick for a moment like that. Something that's a different genre, something that, it's not part of your army or for your game or whatever that you're trying to finish. It's just something fun. I'm going to try to zoom in more, but I don't know how successful I'm going to be at staying in frame. So I'm trying to do side brushing a little bit where I'm using the side against the texture, which is kind of like the fancy version of dry brushing. But I think I might just go use the tip of the brush a little more. Just to make it a bit faster. Hopefully I'm staying in frame. I had everything all set up, and then I was putting on my base coats, and I was noticing that when I was really trying to focus and make sure I could see stuff, I wasn't necessarily doing the best job of keeping in frame. So I will try to check periodically, but feel free to yell at me in chat about that. So probably one difference between my paint and Anne's is that I suspect that I have not added as much water to my paint. I added a drop of water to each, but there's probably 5 or 8 drops of paint in each little thing, and I may have added a little extra water to the paints where there was more and more white, because the white is more opaque and a little more likely to go chalky, so I tend to add a little more water to highlights that have a significant amount of white in them. But in general, I tend to use more transitions and not thin my paint as much as Anne does, I think. So she probably wouldn't use this many colors to paint transitions from, that darkest color to this lightest one. And then Michael, I was watching him paint on his stream the other day. He mixes on the brush a lot. So he'll just have like pools of paint and get a little bit on the brush and then kind of make sure he likes how it is and then paint. And I prefer having all my colors mixed up. And it's really, there's no, none of those ways are better or worse or right or whatever. It's figuring out what works for you. Actually, I'm going to go back to the face for a minute because it seems like the paint there, because I'm doing more true layering, is taking a little longer to dry. So I'm going back and adding a second coat of the next lightest color to build up transitions a little more gradually. Technically, I believe that these are fingerless gloves, so this hand should actually be the same color as the face and probably that thumb. I will probably just paint them as full gloves because I don't know if I can see all those details on the stream. Um, but also for speed. So now I'm on pure white, which, as I mentioned, is slightly thinned. And I probably won't do too many extra coats of this because I want this area to stay a little bit darker than the other white areas. You notice I'm not going too much to the side. This is kind of like a column, so I want it to look more shaded on the sides. Oh, and I have my usual trusty sponge. When I dip in, since I'm not a delicate person who just dips in the very little tip, I wipe off the excess paint on there. So that part is not on screen, but I am doing it. It's actually most important to do it if you're using super thin paint. I'm just going to add a little extra white in a few spots in the middle of the column and kind of along the edge of this piece of lace, or these pieces of lace, to draw out that they are kind of tiers of lace. Let's see. So I'm going to go up a color on the face. This may be, no, not too bad. Because I did thin it down, it's not too much sharper of a transition than I would normally use. So I don't know if anyone has any questions about monochromatic painting. I mean, depending on the kinds of figures you paint, it's not the kind of thing that's going to come up every day. If you do like zenithal type painting, that's essentially monochrome, and then you go over it with color. So while this isn't a kind of painting that you would do every day, I do think it's educational to do, because I was talking about if you want to push your contrast, or you want to push doing kind of like textures and effects like that, because again, you don't have color. So if you want something to look like leather or hair or whatever, that's between the sculpture and you. Hey, Nomad Zeke. It sounds like you didn't get a notification. I'm just working on the transition edge a little. I'm going to try not to be too fussed about that stuff today, so that I will get through more of the figure. And as with the previous coat, I'm going to do multiple coats to build up the opacity. And then also that should help with edges, since it is slightly thinned paint. But I do want the highlights on her face to be nice and luminous. So that's why I'll probably switch over to the greenish one instead of the bluish one on the next step. Hi, Obibazine. Trying to tell if that's still drying or not. So for those who came a little later, I'm working with the monochromatic color scheme. I'll just zoom out quickly. I kind of pre-mix my paints. I'm ignoring these greens. Mostly I thought I might play around with it, but I'm not going to. But this green I will probably use in some places on the face to help draw more attention to it, make it stand out from the white colors. I'm trying to remember. So one of the things that can be challenging about this, and even sometimes if you mix your colors in advance, regardless of whether it's monochromatic or not, is keeping track of which is which part did I, which color did I paint each section. So I just did this, 15 minutes before the show, so I did remember that this is the color I started with on the skin, and this is the color I started with on the flowers, and this is the color I started with on the hair. But if you had this on like a standard palette, or even a round palette, I've numbered it sometimes. So I'll write down that, okay, so the pants color, like I think when I painted these guys for real, these are the Deadlands Noir figures. So there's 5 or 6 of them on the Reaper site, and I painted all of them in a monochromatic color scheme based on the art from the game. So if you want to look at some more monochromatic examples, and those are they have kind of a Sin City thing where each had an accent color. So he's had like an electric blue on the book, and then the girl had a red dress, and someone else had like purple jewelry or something, I think. So they each had a little accent color as well. So that was a little bit different than a standard monochromatic scheme, but not really a lot. So when I was doing them, and I write down on cards. I don't think I have one of my example cards, but I will write down sometimes. Here we go. The colors I use, partly for my benefit, partly for yours. In this case, I might just write down, okay, the pants are 3. So I just kind of number it from 1 to whatever. And the hair is 8. So if you're doing it, you can use a plastic, one of those plastic plates or something like that. You can even write it down with Sharpie so that you can kind of keep track of which is which. Hi, Jared's Train Minis. And Matt Wellman 2010 asks, are you giving that highlight time to dry before going up a level, or are you using the wetness to blend? In this case, I am giving the highlight time to dry a little. That's why I was kind of switching between the underskirt and the face for a while, because I'm moving it around, and if I see any sheen on the face, I want to leave that until it's a bit drier. I do occasionally wet blend, but this is going to be pretty much pure layering. I didn't do washes or anything. Now this paint looks like it may have thickened up a little. I don't really have a ton more lights than I normally use, but. And if you were a slower painter, and I do use this, I was saying at the beginning of the stream that I will often mix these paints up and then use them over several days, saving them with a sponge on top. I forgot to get this out before I started. There we go. You can use a little bit of drying retarder to help the paint stay fluid longer. So I don't always use this, but if I know that I'm going to be keeping this for a while, and then when I'm not painting, I have pretty much soaking wet sponges, and I put them over like that. So all the little wells are covered, and the sponges are actually wetter than this. It should be when you squeeze it, water comes out. But just enough that when they're just sitting here, water doesn't come out. And then I will check the paints once a day or every other day and make sure that they don't need water added. Like this one does need a little water added. One other thing I did differently is, because I know I'm really only painting this afternoon, is I didn't fill these wells up all the way. So if you fill them pretty close to the top, that's going to help the paint keep longer, because you've got a larger amount of paint with less of it exposed to the air. If that makes sense. I'm sure there's some science term for that I am not remembering right now. Hi, Rings Raccoon. Someone else was saying that they didn't get the notification straight away, so I don't know if that's just Twitch being twitchy today. Actually, I had meant to come in with this slightly green color on some of these highlights as well. So I am cheating the monochromatic just a little, but it is still mainly about value. Because I want her to have a nice, creepy, ghosty glow. So on kind of regular scale people, and I guess just in case anyone's interested, here's her 4 scale next to this figure, and she's pretty much the same scale as the rest of the Bonsylvanians. So typically I do the eyes first, partly because if I mess up, like if I started doing that when I was a newer painter, and if I messed up to the point where I was filling in detail and had to strip the figure, which I don't know that ever actually happened, but if I did the eyes first, then I wasn't wasting, anything else. I would just be stripping the eyes and starting again. But it didn't take very long before I really started to like it from the point of view of, I feel like it gives them more character and stuff if the eyes are done and they're, instead of looking at me with a blank stare like she is. With these cheese figures, I think I did do the eyes later at the end, because also it's big enough that it's easier to not mess anything up. Let's see. I think that shadow on the nose is just a little too dark. I wanted the darker shadow to be mainly under her chin, and I could even go, a little bit deeper under here. Because that is an area that really does not get a lot of light, and so is right under our nose. And now I'm going to go up to the pure white, because there's going to be a lot of white on this figure, so I do want to make sure that I have that contrast between the very dark eye line, because she'd put a little bit of makeup on for a wedding right before she died. And that'll give me like a really stark contrast between like having some of the lightest color or lightest value that's on the figure right here next to some of the darkest value that's on the figure, which is one reason I did kind of fill in the eye lines. Thanks, Ring. At the beginning of the show, I went through the colors that I picked, and I'll probably pause and do it again when paint is drying. Because I'm going to do a blog post with the colors that I used to paint all of these guys, but I noticed when I was looking at her colors that all of them except white weren't really available for purchase right now. So I thought I would come up with an alternate palette of colors that are available in case anyone wants to try this. Now the simple version would be to do something like this, which I think is the Twilight Blues. So I would have used blue liner, midnight blue, twilight blue, snow shadow, and then white. And that'll give you a similar kind of blue ghosty feel, but I wanted to add just a little touch of green in these because I had, he's part of the Bonsylvanians that are available in plastic, I think. But I did like a ghost with chains, like more of a classic style ghost. And with him, I went for like a really bright, glowing green type of look. And so he does have a neat spectral vibe. And I'm kind of doing a combo here, I guess. Let's see. I told you guys I wouldn't like fuss too much about the blending. So I probably need to keep my word on that. Because we have some more spots to get through. In this case, I'm just trying to keep the greens to the face, I think. All right, so there, she's already nice and glowing, I think. Ring says blues and blue greens are some of my favorite colors. I'm actually not huge on like just standard blue, but like blue green or faded blues, those I like a lot. Or teals. So as I was mentioning, I don't want to work on the white if there's messier stuff that I haven't done. And I think the hair definitely counts as messier stuff. So for the hair, I'm using probably, I don't think I used a color this dark on the original one, so I think this was kind of my darkest color, or equivalent. So I'm going to go with that and just fix some bits of hair that got messed up from the skin painting. But when we're talking about contrast, as we, almost always are, I didn't want to paint her as, a blonde, pale type figure, because the part of the reason that the skin has that pop and is jumping out to you is because it is surrounded by something dark. So making the hair a little darker, and it's gonna, this is the shadow color, it's gonna be less dark by the time I'm done. But that is part of what's popping the face. But you have this same problem when you're painting with color. So if you're trying to paint like a fair maiden type color or type character, and the hair is blonde and the skin is super pale and the dress is pale, and you don't want to use lining because you think that looks too stark, you are painting a character that's going to look kind of like a pale blob from any distance. So you need to do something. You need to either add some contrast in some of your color choices, or make sure you do some nice lining so that people can tell one area from another. And you also would want to use color contrast if you have color available to you. Like you might have the yellowy blonde hair and then, use light purple in the shadows of the dress so that you're getting complementary color contrast. Okay, so that's actually going to have to dry a little bit, so I'm going to work on this flower in the meantime. This flower I didn't make too dark, or the bouquet. So she's got a flower on the top of her head, and then she's got this bouquet of little flowers. And I didn't make this super dark because I don't want it to stand out too much. I did originally try using some of the greens, and that seemed like it really stood out. So I decided I wanted to keep the greens to places further up in the figure so that I'm drawing attention to the face. I mean, the bouquet tells some of the story of who this figure is, but it's not like a super important part of this story. The face is a much more important part of that story. I think the hair is dry now, so I'm going to start going up. And again, this would be a fine texture to do dry brushing on. Maybe I'll try and do more side brushing because there's nice definition between the strands. I'm approaching this very similarly to how I would always approach hair. I like a very, unless the character is like a zombie or, unwashed barbarian or something, I like a very shiny, healthy hair look. I like to exaggerate the contrast of highlights that the hair would have. And for a character like this, I would probably even do that more than I would normally do. In fact, I'm just going to jump up a few levels on my mixes because I want to start building up that highlight contrast. And if I need to, I can go back and smooth things out with the in-between mixes. And if you're interested in how I would paint hair more on like a classic style figure, or maybe you're trying to make it look a little more naturalistic. It's actually this, like I said, I'm using the same principles really. But if you'd like more information than that, there's a video on Reaper's YouTube page where I did a hair tutorial and talked about my hair painting process in a lot more detail with examples and stuff. I also have, if you go to my website, which is up at the top, and you look, I think there's like painting topics on the first page. There'll be one how to paint hair, and that links to the video, and it also gives you still pictures of the examples that I had in the video, which in some ways can give you more information. So it's kind of like reference pictures to figure out where I put the highlights and stuff like that. It is harder for me to talk if I'm trying to do like nice painting than when we're doing our little tests and stuff. Which so I'm trying to debate what to do next week because that's actually like the closest to Halloween. So I was thinking maybe I'd paint more on the, you know, I didn't finish the owl on this guy, and there are two other figures in the little familiar pack. Let's see, I think I have them all here. So the figures that are on sale special this month are metal, not like the fly. There are plenty of plastic bones of minions, but these and then the owl sitting on a pumpkin are in a pack that are like the Bones of Indian familiars. So I was figuring maybe I'd work on finish up the pumpkin and then maybe work on the cat or the bats if there was still time. So if that sounds good to you, let me know. And then I guess the other option is I can go back to our dry brush tests. But I figure those can wait till November when it's not, you know, a nice spooky holiday. I'm gonna switch to some green and see how that does. So that was a fair jump in value, lighter value, and I think that paint has thickened up just a little. So I'm gonna have to blend that in, but you can see how you get a lot more of a shine. But I am going to put just a little bit of water in these. Quindy says yes to all of the spooky content. Julia Trent loves bats. And Mint Rose 29 loves the familiars. I think they're pretty fun, so I think that would be a fun thing for us to do. Have a little more Halloween. Now I can't remember which one I want, but we'll see. This happens to me with monochromatic schemes as well, that I will sometimes forget where I was. And that's probably the reason that I like to mix my stuff and have them in a row like that is it's certainly improved, but I don't think I have a great eye for matching values. Where someone like Michael Proctor, who I mentioned, would, you know, have a few colors out and then be mixing kind of on the brush. If you watch some of his episodes of Crow's Nest where he's painting, you can see him doing that. He doesn't have all these things pre-mixed the way I do. I think people who do that probably have a bit of a better eye for judging the value of colors. And that's something you can get better at. I mean, I think I have gotten better at it. But now I'm just kind of used to doing it this way. This is just sort of my process, and it works for me. And it's probably quicker than if I try to do it the other way. So as we've experienced before, acrylic paint will come off if you make a boo-boo and you get it quick. And this, what I'm doing right now, where I accidentally, well, mostly accidentally, went up sharper in value so that I'm not getting as nice of blends, but I'm getting the brighter highlights. that is a good way to push yourself to paint brighter highlights. So you go in and you just put like really bright highlights in, and then you do the smoothing so that you're forcing yourself to have the contrast, and then go back and fix it later. Instead of, if you work your way up, it's really easy to talk yourself out of putting enough contrast on something. So that's the kind of thing you see people doing. They call it sketching. A lot of time in the miniatures world, in the regular art world, I think they'd be more likely to call it roughing in or blocking in. But you want to get an idea of your colors and your values before you spend a lot of time making everything pretty. If you do it the other way, which is how I've painted a long time, working up and making everything pretty, and then you get something wrong, that's a lot of work you have to redo. Ring says that no preference as to what I do next week, but very kindly says I'm enjoyable to listen to and might be able to be more regular now that the schedule has changed. Well, thank you, Rings. Quindy says, I'm just about finished painting Elsa, and then I want to paint Boris to go with her before the month is over. Yeah, I like those ones because they do go together. So you could make a diorama with them, or you could just pose them where their hands meet. Did I have both of those? Yeah, I have Boris and Elsa. So they're just the right height that you can kind of pose them like this. You could make a little diorama if you wanted, or just put them side by side. Because they were originally for Valentine's Day, not for Halloween. And I'm going to put just even a little brighter highlight on the hair. I don't think I'm going to go all the way up to white, because where I often do go all the way up to white on hair, but this is a fairly dark hair and I want to keep some more attention on the face. But now I'll try and smooth it out a little. And probably add, lesser highlights in a few spots to bring out some of the shapes a little more. So I was saying that I was initially very nervous to paint these figures when Ron asked me about them, because I hadn't really painted anything in this style. And then I ended up having a lot of fun. And that's in the context of, I had a pretty tight deadline on these. I think in 2014, there were 3 a week, and I didn't have them like way in advance. I had them a week or so in advance, I think. And for me, that's a lot of painting in a week. I'm not a very fast painter. So I had fun with most of them despite that. There were just a few. The Cthulhu one, which is one of the ones that's in plastic, it's not one of the ones that's like special this month, kind of gave me fits, which was a color thing. So I ended up, I was trying to do something with the color on the shadows, and it just didn't want to work. I think I ended up painting it over 3 times until I had a shadow color I liked, and then I could start with the highlights. So I like how he came out, but he was definitely not my favorite one to paint. But most of them, even though I was like on a deadline and rushing and stuff, were a really nice break. It was fun to experiment with the eyes. It was fun to paint kind of a different kind of character. See, Queenie says, when all these came out week by week is why I wound up with so many bottles of BCA pink and a couple of Reaper rocks. Yeah, I can imagine that. Speaking of breast cancer pink, I cannot remember if I showed what, like I did swatches last week, and I can't remember if I showed what they look like when they were dry. So just in case I didn't. So the colors that come in the Ghoulie bag are pumpkin orange, which I think is a special edition color. That's 9.6 means it's a special edition color. And the Nightmare Black is available all the time. So if you just want that, you can just go buy that one. And then this was Breast Cancer Awareness Pink from 2020. I just wanted to compare it to the 2021 mix, and I think it's pretty similar. But this year they've also got a second color. So if you do make multiple orders, hopefully you end up with 2 different colors of pink. And I like that one. It's a little peachier, which I thought was... That's a color I don't mix very well, and I do like to have for things. And it doesn't seem to be very popular in miniature paints to peachier colors. Or at least more saturated peachier colors. There's some peachy skin colors. So blending tends to be a back and forth thing for me. And many other people, I think. I'm only going to go so crazy with this because I don't want to spend all my time here and then miss out on showing you guys other stuff. Oh, I don't think I even did as much. But I am going to, I lost some of the between the strands. I'm just going to put some of that back in. And then try working on this flower bouquet for a little bit. Now that it's dry. And then these are like very tiny little flowers, or like little petals of flowers. So, which would also work well for dry brushing. So this figure is accessible if you prefer just doing dry brushing and washing. I'm just kind of trying to give you the short version of how I painted the one for Reaper. Which, what I mean, 2014, 2015 was a little while ago now. I was looking through the pictures and thinking that there are some things I would do differently if I were to paint them today. Some areas where I'd probably put more contrast in. Like, I think her hair is probably, if we go back to the photograph, I suspect her hair is a little more contrasted than the way I painted the original one. I ended up not mixing enough of that color because that's what I base coated the dress and the veil with. Those are little strings there. And then like I think they usually wrap that kind of bouquet. The stems, I mean. Am I in view? Yes. Okay, apologies for shaking the camera with my eye visor. Granny was saying she likes the new BCA pink. It's pretty. I've never been a fan of the original color, just not something I have much need for. Yes, it is a very specific color. It's very bubblegummy. And Ring says, the oldest miniature I have is from 2003. I just bought another version to repaint to do a side-by-side of my progress. I think that is a great idea. I highly recommend that. Especially if you're feeling like you aren't making a lot of progress. That is a great thing to do because you will very likely find out that you have made a lot more progress than you realize if you do a repaint of things. Actually, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. Villain's eyeliner color a little. It'll probably take me a few coats of white to go up. did that. And now I think we're on to the fun part of the all the smooth white. So here I have to decide if I want, so this is the kind of the color that I base coated all of the white areas, the dress and the veil and stuff. So I think I want to put a little more shading in somewhere, in some places. So let's check the consistency of that. That is getting, I should have filled these walls up more. I will say that, I mean, it does use a little bit of paint to do this method, but if you're painting something like the Fire Scion, you're going to go through some paint anyway. Oh, and Ring says it was a Reaper Mini too. Well, I hope that you will share pictures when you do that. So even though it doesn't look like this is, that there's a big difference between these, that's, you know, shadow colors on white are kind of like that, and you can see that it's actually a more significant difference than it initially seemed. And I do have regrets about that. We'll just take some time and smooth it out. And that very often I end up doing that with white. That's one of the advantages of doing the sketching type thing, is that you get to see your values better as you go along, because sometimes it won't be clear that you've gone too dark or you haven't gone dark enough on something until you get the rest of the colors filled in. But even though this is white, I do still have to show the dimension of it, show that there are places with folds and places that, you know, the dress is over. The bodice of the dress is on top of the skirt, and then there's kind of like a two-skirt thing going on. There are these nice folds in the back as well. I'm probably going to go darker around those areas. Let's check and see what's going on in the front. Like under the sides and the armpit, the undersides of the arm. Then I'm going to paint a darker color over the bodice ties so that I can come back and add the white on top. This is probably too dark, but let's thin it down and see what happens. There may be a few places where, oh, well, you can't see the pan. I'm talking about this one. Maybe a few places that need it. Ring says, of course I will share. I'm an attention addict. It's always interesting to see when people do the then and now type thing. So mostly I'm just using this as a liner color. That's one thing. If you're someone who feels like lining is unnatural and you don't like doing it, you don't have to use black. You can customize liner to whatever you're painting, whatever colors you're painting. So in this case, since I'm painting, you know, I'm lining in between areas of white, I can pick something much lighter than black or blue liner, which is actually, I rarely line with black, but I'm kind of a blue liner addict. But liner does represent something that naturally happens, which is if you get something sitting on top of something else. Like next time you have a cup of coffee or something, look at your mug on the table, and you will see a little line of shadow underneath it because, you know, the light's being obscured in some areas. And that's what lining duplicates. So these areas where something is hanging over something else, there would be shadow, and it actually often looks weirder if there is not. So if I just left, you know, the dress all the same color and I didn't paint these in, it would probably look weirder than what I'm doing now. I would say lining is like the number one thing that you can do to take your painting up a level. I mean, you know, if you're just starting out and you're not painting loads of contrast and all that kind of thing. Oh, I forgot to line around her gloves. Hello, Caru WS9. Today I am working on this little creepy cute figure. It's one of the Bonzovanians that Reaper has several of them actually. But this one has not been available to buy since they first came out in 2015. And at least I don't think they've been out again since then. But Reaper has them up for sale this month as kind of a Halloween special thing. Oops, I put lighter paint. Where should be darker paint? Don't know if I like the bouquet. I might return to that. I might go lighter on the bouquet, I think. Well, the flower part. The bouquet. So I'm not actually going to bother to repaint the bottom part. That should be nice and shadowed. Just going to lighten up this upper portion so that it is, it's more different to the stems and the wrapping. Caru got the Medusa one. Yeah, she's fun. She is a cute one. We can go a little bit darker on these areas that are under hangs. I do have a few places to clean up a little. My color that I didn't mix enough of. That one is that one on screen? Hopefully she's staying in focus all right, because I know I've had trouble when I put the palette behind, but it seems to be working better with the, nope, that was meant to be here. It seems to be working better with the weld palette than it usually does with the dry palette. I mean the wet palette. Gonna just put a little more of a line of shadow in between where the veil and the dress meet. I think I need to stop being stubborn and just mix more of this color here, which will happen when I do my, so just, I know that you people have been here from the beginning. I apologize. This is going to bore you some more. So I'm using a weld palette today. And if I'm doing blending work over a period of time, like over days, I do this, not a wet palette. I don't find that I can keep the paint at the correct consistency and nice enough to work with on a wet palette. The secret of making this work is I put these sponges on top when I'm not painting. Or even, well, if I was only working in this area, which I mainly am now, then I'm working on the dress, I would keep that sponge over there, and then the reverse if I was working on the hair, you know. So I have these. These would actually be pretty much dripping wet, where if you squeeze them, a little bit of water is going to come out. I didn't make them quite as wet because I'm just painting for this afternoon. But I would also tend to fill these more. But I would genuinely have this problem that I'm having right now where I might have a color that I ended up using a lot more than I expected of, and I need to mix more. So I would mix that with Templar Blue, and maybe I'll just run through my mixes real quick after I do this, for those who missed it at the beginning. So when mixing a lighter color or a weaker color with a darker color or a stronger color, start with a lot of your one and then just mix in a little of your other. And I did actually have just a touch of this green color in there as well. Because otherwise, you know, you're going to add a ton of white to the other one. Even there, I don't know if I put enough paint in. Hey, Daffod Weir. Since this is an important color on the dress, you know, one that I'm using in volume on the dress, I think I might as well just go ahead and mix a bit more of it right now. Because there's a lot of white in there, I'm going to add some water. All right, so I'm going to put my sponges there for a sec and talk about how I made these colors. So let's go to the images for a minute. So this is the figure I'm working on painting today, this is the version that I painted for Reaper in 2015. And these are the colors that I used. So it was 2 HD paints that have been canceled, a sample that no one ever got, and then Maggot White that just got canceled. So when I was sharing, you know, thinking about sharing my paint colors with everyone, I was like, well, that's not very helpful. And then if I pick this one to paint today, it's like I'm showing you guys a bunch of stuff you can't have. So I worked out alternatives for the colors that I had used. And it's mainly the Templar Blue is pretty close to the Winter Blue. Then if you add a bit of white, it's pretty close to my original sample color. The Night Sky Blue Kraken ink, which is currently, or was just a ReaperCon color either this year or last year, mixed with Templar was the closest match. But if you use Midnight Blue with Templar, it's pretty close. So that's an alternative you could use. I wouldn't even bother trying to, I identified Hobgoblin as something that could replace the sample, but since the Templar plus white is so close, I wouldn't even bother with that. And then Maggot White, if you have the ReaperCon colors, Vampire Pallor is close, but the color that I mixed on my palette, I just added a little bit of Dragon Green to white to make these colors on this side, which I've ended up really, so that's kind of my Maggot White equivalent, Maggot White Vampire Pallor equivalent, which I've really just been using on the face to give it an extra little bit of glow that's different from the other areas where I'm using the more blue-based ones. There's a little bit of green in all of this section, and then the night sky is a little bit purple. So it's still a monochromatic color scheme because I'm mainly working in the sense that I'm working with values. So I'm mainly using values from, you know, lightest to darkest, other than there's a little bit more green on her face to try and make it stand out. And I'm mostly done with the skin and the hair. I mean, you know, the one I painted for Reaper, I spent a little more time on than this. Like maybe a lot more. Well, not a ton more time because I was painting, you know, 3 of these a week. But there was more time. I'm going to work on the flower bouquet a little while I'm thinking about it. But so hopefully that's a color alternative. And then the simple version, if you didn't want to bother with all of that, is you could just use more of a straight monochromatic scheme. So this is blue liner, midnight blue, twilight blue, snow shadow, and then white. But you could even just mix, from blue liner or a very dark blue. I would actually probably use a different dark blue that had a little more blue in it, like something like the Nightmare Black. If you started mixing white into that, you go from that to white, you would get something pretty similar in effect to this. And monochromatic painting is good practice for helping you push your contrast as well as just kind of being fun. Because now that I mixed up all these colors, I don't really have to do much else. Like I don't have to stop and think about what color do I want things to be. It's all about just which value am I putting where. And then doing the, whatever technique you're applying. Blending or dry brushing, washes or whatever. And if I wanted to do washes with one of these, I'd just take a brush full and mix some water in with it. Which I believe I did actually do washes on the original figure for like the dress and some other things. I mean this lacy part of the dress. In this case, for the show, I started with my darkest colors and I'm working up. And I just want to add a little more definition around these ties. So they're going to get painted pure white in a minute. But right now, I'm going back in, and if I don't like, if there's a transition where the shadow's too harsh, I'm going back in with this color that I just mixed. That's it's a lot of white and a little Templar blue and a little bit of the green, dragon green. And I'm touching up places that I might have messed up with by putting in shadows. But I do want to have some shadows. And this color, this mix is essentially a shadow because a lot of what I'm going to go over a lot of that with white. So these little dips and depressions are going to end up, that's the shadow color. But I want to clean everything up before I go there. Because I'd seen a couple of places, like right there, I spilled some paint. Or I made got a shadow too far over, something like that. So some of these bones of veins are also available in Bones Plastic all the time. These metal ones are, I guess, going back in the vault at the end of October. But if you want to try this on a different figure, I think it would work pretty well on, there's like a Nosferatu looking guy. There's two kind of classic vampires. There's a little wolf man, werewolf guy. Those all sort of being classic horror figures. I think they would all look nice in like a black and white. Or any of them would look nice in a black and white monochromatic scheme if you wanted to practice with monochromatic colors. Alright, I think I corrected most of my goofs, so now I'm just going to paint a lot of white. Well, and that, I don't know if you can see that, how it's kind of goopy. That is definitely too thick. You can also see how it's just leaving lumps on the side. Oops. So white paints tend to be a little more opaque, a little chalkier. So I'm definitely going to add some water to that. And if you like this idea of using this kind of palette, but your paints are drying up too fast, or you live in a drier climate, or during the winter when the furnace is running, which is probably what's happening to me today. It's finally gotten cold enough that the furnace is running some. You can add a little bit of drying retarder, and that makes paints stay wet longer. And it looks like maybe I should have done that since, I don't know why when I'm painting on screen sometimes stuff seems to act different than when I'm not. I find that sometimes that happens at conventions too. Paint will not dry when it's supposed to, and it will dry too fast when it's not supposed So the transition line isn't great. The white's probably a little thick still, but I'm going to go with it and then thin it down more and do the fixing. Or I could even have a second pool that was more fluid white to do the transitions. But just as with the hair, in some ways I'd rather, get the basics down of where I want stuff and then do the fiddling. Which is not at all how I used to paint. This is something I've been trying to do more of over time, because I think in the end it ends up being more efficient to be confident that you got stuff where you want it and at the value that you want it before you spend a lot of time trying to make it look pretty. But it does mean having to make the mental adjustment of being okay with things looking imperfect as you go along. Rings asked, is it the heat of the lights and the extra electronics that's causing faster drying? These are the same amount of lights that I use normally. Maybe the camera puts out more heat than I think it does. But the only extra light I have is just a little ring light it's way up high. So I don't think that that's causing the problem. But yeah, it's weird because I normally add a little more water than I think I do. I don't know. Or at least when I get to the layering stage. Probably the difference is that I would do the base coats one consistency and then do the layers a different consistency, and I was trying to save time. Or I would mix more steps. I think, so I have pre-mixed colors for black and white, which is less for monochromatics and more for non-metallic metal. But I think that I have 11 transitions between black and white on that. So I'm kind of all about the transitions for making blending easier. But also stippling, you can kind of stipple some of them better. And it's not quite as choppy as I thought it was at first. I think it was just, when you first start putting something down and it seems so different from something else. Which is another thing that makes it hard for us to push our contrast. A lot of effects in painting, non-metallic metal is definitely one. You got to push through. You got to give it the chance to get to the end, and then step back and go, okay, does this work? Does this suck? A lot of times you might be on the right track, but if you get fed up with it and paint over it before you're really done, you're not going to realize that. So when you start getting past, start getting into more intermediate effects and techniques and stuff, a certain amount of it is developing the patience to just ride it out and see whether it works, especially the first few times when you haven't done it, so you don't know whether you're doing it right or not. I guess this computer could be sitting over here being warmer than I think it is. It certainly does get a little warm sometimes. I have no idea what time it is. Okay, this is actually, I may be able to finish this in the time allotted, which I thought I might, because that's kind of one of the fun things about monochromatic, is that you can paint up a little faster. Because that Dead Linen Noirs guy that I was showing you before, it was like a 2-hour class, I think, and that I only got to paint after I finished explaining stuff and demonstrating to people. So I did not have that long to paint. I may not be able to finish the little details like her mouth and stuff. I'm going to go ahead and put, or maybe I can save the eyes to do next week, because I won't really need to have all these paints. I can do it with the wet palette. So is everybody getting ready for Halloween, decorating? And I don't know if you're going to a party or you have kids working on costumes. Just eating a ton of candy because you're pretending that you're going to give it out to the kids, but you bought it and it's already there. I'm not saying that this is happening in our house, but yeah, when we were at the store recently, my husband's all like, well, let's buy Halloween candy. And I'm like, we get 4 kids. We could buy like 4 chocolate bars and just call it a day. So I'm not sure why you bought a bag full of like 180 mini candy bars, because how many of those are kids going to eat and how many of those are we going to eat? There's not a lot of kids in our neighborhood, and then our house is set like really far back on a hill, so it does look like the spooky Halloween house in a way, because we've got all these trees and we're not much for like making the yard look amazing or whatever. So it's not going to be the first place that the kids want to go. Parents who want to tire the kids out might want them to come to our house. Make them walk up the hill, get their little pieces of candy. But I'm sure there are neighborhoods that are way more fun than ours. We get some people that decorate a little, but we don't have anyone that really goes all out. Our main decoration is that I got one of those big blow-up balloon dragons, which I don't consider purely a Halloween decoration, but we have a different one for Christmas. So, Christmas dragon, and then the fall dragon, I guess we'll call them. And I really want like a summer one. Like I want a dragon, big blow-up dragon that's like wearing a Hawaiian shirt or something, just something that would make it summery. But I'm not sure like Lowe's and Home Depot are quite there with me yet. Quindy says, I'm trying to decide how to decorate my apartment door because my building is having a door decorating contest, and I figure as the only goth in the building, I should probably at least participate. Yeah, I think you need to represent. Grey Mouser said, we have the same problem. My wife already ate all the Laffy Taffy. Yeah, our bag is like, I think Twix, M&Ms, and Snickers. But it looks like even before we started rating the bag, there were only like 3 Twix bars in there. So I don't know what that's all about. But I very much suspect that the kids will not be getting Twix, since there are so few. We will have snagged them first. When I was a kid, when I got my candy home, I'd always kind of rank it mentally, if not physically, and then kind of eat it in order. It'd be like the chips, and then the candy bars I liked, and then the candy bars I didn't like, and then like the crappy candies that I didn't like. I'd still be working on those in like February or March. Not the ones that I didn't like, but you know, that aren't as exciting. And then to build up the white, since it is sand down a little. But I did this with most of the other colors when I was highlighting. I did multiple coats to build up the color, but try to keep the transitions nice. So it is not weird that I'm having to do the same thing with the white.
if you try some of these and you're not sure what to do with the eyes, I found it helpful to, I did like just a Google search or something similar. This was long enough ago. Was I even using Google? I don't know. To look at like anime eyes and chibi eyes and stuff and just see the different approaches that people have taken. And then I kind of settled on kind of a general approach for sort of the more human looking characters like this. And then I looked at kind of like monster pictures and animal pictures and stuff to change it up for like the Cthulhu and the Medusa. I think she had a version of Snake Eyes. I gave the mermaid funky weird eyes too. We wanted to make her a little creepier. Than she might have been kind of by default, because I guess technically mermaids aren't. Well, I mean, the story of the sirens and stuff, they can be pretty scary.
So that's not coming along too bad. Let's see. Nomad Zeke says Quindy's the only goth in the building. She obviously needs to pick up the slack for everyone else and go nuts. Gray Mouser has tiny boxes of nerds, so apparently they don't appeal to either one of us. Well, that'd be cannibalism, right? Nerds eating nerds. Mint Rose 24. I made my husband put our bag of candy on a top cabinet shelf so I couldn't see it. It's the only reason to survive that long. That's good strategy. Knowing it's there, if you don't see it, that really helps a lot. If there's stuff you don't want to get into, at least it helps. I'm so forgetful that I can totally put something away and forget that I have candy or whatever in the house. But if I see it, then I'm like, well, now I want candy after lunch. So has it been staying in focus pretty much? Because I think it has been, but maybe I'm just not catching it when it's going out of focus. But I feel like it's working better than it has when I've tried to put my wet palette in the background. And I'm not sure why that would be. I mean, this thing is all white and shiny too, so. But I realize I've forgotten the little flower up here. Let's see. So I made this flower fairly dark and then made the leaves a bit lighter. I do have to fix the leaves where they got some of the white from the veil on them. And they don't look like they stand out a lot right now, but as I add highlights, I think that this is what I'm talking about, how you get a value challenge with doing monochromatic. So this flower is like half on a very light thing and half on a very dark thing. So I have to figure out how to, it doesn't have to stand out and smack you in the face, but I need to differentiate it from those other two surfaces enough that you can tell that it's not just, she's got a weird blob on her head for some reason. Her hairstyle didn't quite turn out. Something like that. I want it to be clear that it is this nice flower. And I think I will do the leaves first. Green User says all this talk of candy is dangerous. That is true. Ring said, I dressed up as a princess one year and gave out candy to the treaters. Too many parents had looks of horror on their faces, and I have not had trick-or-treaters since. More candy for me, though it is ruining my girlish figure. Well, those are some silly parents, is what I would say to that. But we've never really dressed up for the kids, but now I'm feeling all this pressure. We did Weeper Errant on Friday, and I've been known to wear funny hats on the show, and we all wore funny hats or something for Halloween last year. But someone was like, well, I'm real curious to see what Rhonda does for the Halloween episode. And I'm like, well, now the pressure's on. I was just going to recycle one of my other hats. But I found something that I think I want to get just because I want to get it. So I don't know if it's super cool or whatever, but
think I'm going to get it just so I have it. So I am going to pop these leaves just a little on the edges. Make sure it stands out, and then we have to work on the little flower petals. And this is more of a single flower, where the bouquet was like a collection of little tiny flowers, I think. So I want to spend a little more effort to pick out some of the individual petals. Because it's very rose-like, and you'll get that thing where roses, have a darker color in the crevice in between the petals, and then the edges of the petals will look lighter. Maybe for some of that, the trick will be adding more dark rather than more light. So it doesn't end up looking too much like the leaves. Gray Mouser. I didn't have fond memories for a few years because my sister and mothers liked to dress us up as girls. For Halloween or just in general. Rings Raccoon. People have weird opinions and could not see the humor in my costume. People definitely do have weird opinions. I don't know why. But if the past couple of years has proven anything, is that people have weird opinions that they are very firm about. Let's see, I don't need to be very careful with a few bright highlights on some petals. All right, well, hopefully there is some difference between the flower and the leaves. Just seeing some areas that need a little more shadow color on the veil. That part was a section that should have been veil colored and ended up being hair color. Now that I'm a little tiny brush out, I'll do a few touch-ups. So that's not too bad for a couple hours, I guess. For Halloween, it was a small rural community, so everyone went to the community hall. I wonder if that's just because it was a cheap costume. I know my mom for years, for several years, I was like a fancy rich lady because somebody had an old fur coat that I could wear. But this is my weird Halloween story. So one year, she had made me like a princess costume out of old sheets, I think. And then the next year, she didn't want to make a costume. Again, I think that was the fanciest she ever got, was the princess. But she dyed it brown and turned me into a druid, which like no one knew what I was. Except I'm going around door to door, and then I knock on this door, and they're like, "Oh, you're a druid." And then it was kind of freaky because it's like, "Why do you know who I am? Who are you creepy people?" I was like 6. I didn't know much about druids myself then. I'm going to try taking some pure white and not thinning it down.
add just a little extra whiteness to some spots on the Dresden veil. Max out the whole spectral glow type of idea. It is harder for me to talk when I'm trying to paint for real instead of just doing dry brush tests, which we will get back to in November. I have a couple of, I think I have the Wall of Stone from the most recent Kickstarter, and then some of the Brinewood Docks. So I'm curious to see, I guess it's kind of going backwards, but I'm curious to see what happens when we use more traditionally dry brush friendly techniques with some of the different brushes that I've been playing around with. You need a bigger brush for the veil. Somewhere I have a piece of paper where I painted out all the Reaper whites. I think it's Dragon White is the brightest one. Partly because it's a little bit glossy, I think. So if I were being really persnickety, I could get, you know, a shinier white to do the uppermost highlights of something white. But I think I shall content myself with this. Pretty sure Anne has said that pure white is the one with the most pigment. Something I had to fix, but now I don't know if I see it. I like to have a nice clean line. I'll work on that. Well, actually, now that everything else is done, I will go paint the little, so these were really fingerless gloves. Oh, I think if you wanted to paint them as solid gloves, that would work fine. But I think we have a little time yet. So I'll work on that. Think about whether there's anything else I want to mess with. Let's see if I can do something with the lip. So lips, I do tend to work from the darkest color up. Lips are actually, so everybody complains about eyes. To me, lips are the hardest thing because, you know, I can do the eyes first and I'll tend to, you know, if I painted the eye and the eyeliner's all out here and they have big raccoon eyes, well, it doesn't matter. I haven't painted the skin yet. So then I paint the skin and I clean up that line. With lips, everything's painted. So to me, there's less room for messing up. And then you have this problem where, like I'm having right now, we're getting the angles. It seems a little harder. Get things with, you know, whether you're right-handed or left-handed, you'll find that
something, you know, a certain, it's easier for me to paint the left side of the lip because I'm right-handed, and if you were left-handed, it would probably be the reverse. You'd have an easier time working on that corner. And she actually has little tiny teeth, which I believe that I did not paint in the original one. When I was looking at the photo, I was noticing that. And I don't want to go pure white on the teeth. Teeth, especially since they're inset in the mouth, it would look like really glaring and out of place if I went pure white on them. Since we already decided she's wearing makeup, I'm going to try to do a little shiny lipstick deal. So that's the mouth. Grandmaster said, I think the only Reaper white I used was probably Dragon white mixed with the skeleton in the corset. I do take Anne's word for it that if you're going to have one white, pure white is the one to go with. I tend not to mess with whites that much. Like I'm all about alternate blacks and different blacks and variations of black. But I tend to just have, I'm pure white for when I need white, and that's it. So if you're happy with your white, I think that's probably all you need. I'm not going to go as light as on the highlights in the hand, and I usually don't on normal people either, because the hand is further down, so it's not getting as much light, and it's not the story of the figure. Well, sometimes the hands are important to the story of the figure, depending on what they're doing. Like this hand is more important to the story because it's holding the bouquet. So I do like to paint hands, but kind of keep them in the context of the rest of the figure. Okay, so I think I'm pretty much down to the eyes and the base. I have questions about whether I'll be able to paint the eyes on stream, but let's at least get started. Well, actually, I'm going to start with this slightly darker color. Actually, I should have done the green. I'll do the green for the next coat. Because I want it to be a little darker on the edges. I'm just kind of doing stuff to wait for the eyes to dry now, really. So I'm just adding a little darker shadows to the hair that's like further down. I'm going to have to add some water to that. Yep, you're right, Grey Master. Any white would do for that. Now in art paints, and I do keep meaning to play around with this and then I forget. So our paints probably are all made with titanium white, which is a really nice bright white pigment. But it can be a little trickier to mix with. It can kind of overpower colors. So in art paints, they also have zinc white, which is a more transparent white, so it can be easier to mix with. So it's not great for like what I was trying to do on the veil, which is kind of pop the pop the brightest highlights, you want a nice bright titanium white for that. But it can be a little less tricky to mix with, where your colors get so washed out when you add white. And I have some, but then I keep forgetting to really mess around with it because I'm forgetful like that, I guess. I have whole sets of paint that I'm meaning to mess around with that I haven't done yet. So I'm going to go a little darker in the corners of the eyes, because these are big eyes. So the same kind of thing would apply to, like if you're painting the busts that were in the last Kickstarter, or 75mm figures. Well, not 75mm, it's really busts and stuff. When eyes are bigger, you tend to have to do a little more, or you have room to do a little more. So we call eyeballs eyeballs, and that's true. They're spheres. So they're darker on the edges, the corners of our eyes, than they are in the middle. They appear darker because of the shadows and stuff. And if I have my tiny brush and I'm feeling fancy, I do have enough room on a figure like this to get into that kind of thing if I want. Although I would probably get my closer up visor on to do that. I like to have, especially if it's meant to be like makeup eyeliner, I like it to be thicker on the top of the eyelid than the bottom. So I'm just cleaning some of that up. All right. Just trying to let me review my photo. Then you guys can have more material to judge me too. So if you look at most eyes, there's the colored part, the iris, there's a slightly darker ring around the outside of that, and then lighter color on the inside. And I don't even remember doing that. This is why I tend to have shirts that are just for painting. So I'm going to start with that darker color that I'm trying to make look like a sphere. Or, the bottom part of the sphere, the whole sphere of the iris isn't always visible in our eyes. If you can see the whole, circle of the eye, it tends to look crazy or afraid. I did do that on one of the other, I think I did on a couple of the other Bones Albanians, where I had it so you can see the white all around their eyes. And one is Jake, who is definitely crazy. And I think the other one was there's one that's like a mummy. So he's one of the ones that's in plastic, I believe. At any rate, I know he's not out right now. But to kind of go for a dead look, I was trying to show that he wasn't quite right by making the whites all around the eyes visible. So I painted the eyes as if she's looking off to one side a little bit. And that is definitely a tip for if you're having trouble getting symmetrical eyes on standard size eyes. That is absolutely something that I would try.
And it often gives a little more character or personality. So I think I even want to try some of the straight up green. Just put the touch of a different color. Since we had a little more green in her skin, put a little more green in her eye as well. And that first layer green's a little bit transparent. It's not really going to be that visible. It's more just to set me up for going up in color a little bit. Then I'll come back in and put the pupil. And the pupil got too big. It happens. You can see I've actually gone back and forth several times on parts of these eyes. I'm sure it would help if I went and got my closer up magnifiers, but then I'd be holding it where you guys couldn't see it at all, probably. So just be like a couple of inches away from my face. Now I do want to let that dry because kind of the last step of the anime eyes for me was putting in like a really pronounced reflection thing. And I probably should have painted her eyes looking off to the other side so I could do the reflection opposite of where the brightest eye color is, but it is what it is. So I ended up going with a kind of wedge. Highlight on the original ones that I did. And I didn't use pure white on the eye, which I typically don't, so I would use like something like vampire pallor or linen white, or just white with a little bit of something mixed in. For most eyes, it's going to look a little more natural if you use not quite white. But here, part of the reason I did that is I want that reflection to be even more prominent. So it's not perfect, but I think that's all right for doing it on stream. Something seems a little wonky about her eyes, but maybe I didn't make the right one big enough. I'm not sure. The reflection went down just a little too far. But I'm prepared to call that good enough. Let's give the lipstick even just a little more shine. Now that the eyes are in, it didn't look quite bright enough. And I could even add just a little highlight to teeth, I think. So yep, got her finished up in time. I'm amazed. I'll get my gray paper so you can see it a little better. And there she is. So that's why I recommend doing a monochromatic scheme, because you can get something, you know, quick that also pushes you to work on your skills in some ways. And it's just kind of fun. If you wanted something playable, you know, you got the guys like this. I'm sure there are a lot of monsters that you could kind of do in monochromatic scheme. You just have to figure out what the colors are. But I'll just run through the... Wow, I am not... Okay, don't look dizzy, people. Okay, I will run through the kind of fun stuff from Reaper for this Halloween. So they're doing the Sugar Skull contest. You can buy this figure and paint on it. This is what it looks like out of the blister. But you can also use any Reaper figure that has a skull. And I think I've seen conflicting things about the deadline, but on the website it says October 28th is the deadline to get it in. And then if you go on the website, like at the top of reapermini.com, you'll see a banner with this guy on it. Click that, and then there's a little line in red, and click that, and then you get the rules. Or you click what Quindy just posted in chat. And then if you get this, it's in 2 parts. And yeah, that's right. So there's like a steeper diagonal and then a shorter diagonal. And you put the shorter diagonal against the back of the skull. And I just used super glue and glued that in, and even with my glue curse, it worked fine. It's nice and sturdy. And then if you're curious about some ideas for how you could paint up that figure, or decorate that figure more than painting, you can watch the VOD of last week's show. I brought out a whole bunch of basing stuff I have. So then, I didn't bring the pinks, but any purchase, as long as supplies last, where they can fit a bottle of paint into whatever packing material they have to use for you. So if you buy like just a single miniature or a single paint or something, I don't think they can send it to you. But if it fits in the package, you get one of these breast cancer awareness pinks. I'm not sure if there's even another one again, but I know that for sure. Then if you spend $20 or more, you get this, I think it's called Graveyard Entrance, something like that. And then hopefully Quindy will remember, because now I'm blanking. If you post, you can paint this up and post miniatures, pose with it using hashtag something. Yeah, that's all I have. Is Reaper's in there somewhere. Reaptober. I think it's hashtag Reaptober. And then they'll share that, I think. Hold on just a second. Then if you spend $40 or more, you get the ghoulie bag. And the figure is pumpkin-headed bugbear. Then you get the pumpkin orange and nightmare black. And speaking of candy, you get some of those. And all of those 3 things are like 1 per person per day, I think. 1 per order per day. And then all of the Reaptober. Yeah. Then all of the little chibi characters, like the one that I was painting today, are available for purchase this month only. Well, I suspect they'll crawl out of the vault some other day, but... and I didn't paint all of them. I didn't paint the original familiars. And I didn't paint this guy, but I painted like a whole bunch of these things. So this is a good time to get those. And if you're not familiar with metal miniatures, watch last week's stream, because I prepped her up on stream so you can see how to do it. And I think my voice is telling me that it's time to say goodbye. So we'll let Quindy find us a raid, and you'll have to look at the calendars for the other Reaper shows. But thank you for joining me, keeping me company while I painted that little ghostly bride. I hope you enjoyed it. I had fun painting her again. And I'll see you next week.